Hi again. I've been wanting to talk to you about how the the new features in the Howler 2023 Mandelbrot filter work. We've added some new capabilities and that sort of thing. I have not really talked about in the past, so let's dive in. We've added three new um, parameters. There is also some keyboard shortcuts that we can also talk about. So if we go in, move around the edge of the lake here, this weird fractal lake shaped thing, the black thing in the middle, we can find the part we want to work on in a crude sort of way. But now there's also some keyboard shortcuts, namely the arrow keys that let us move in and out and around. In this, there's some keyboard qualifiers, namely the control key will let us do a fine movement, and the shift key will let us do a more coarse movement. So that's about it. Now, on to how some of these new parameters work. We basically need to understand roughly how the Mandelbrots are rendered. There's this weird function, the math function, that iterates a number of times, and once they hit a certain threshold, uh, they start to fly off into infinity, the values that this function generates, and we can set this threshold, this escape threshold, we call it, to anything. If it's a low value, we only get a certain number, a small number of iterations. I think is linked to the depth here. So if we did one, we'd have like no iterations at all, so forth and so on. 100 of these, you might not see hardly any um, of these steps like that you see here. So 30, you would see only like a couple. So it's like at one escape threshold, I think there's like a literal depth where you see that many colors or steps or like these posterized steps that you see here. So I'll set this to 255 again. And if we set this escape threshold to something bigger, you start to see more detail. And the bigger we set it, the more detail you see. In fact, I'll turn off smooth shading. That's a new parameter that we have. And if you turn that off, you'll see these, like I said, these posterized steps. This would probably give a better example of what we're talking about. So I'll set this to 1. You see nothing, maybe 10. You still see almost nothing, but say like 33, and you start to see these steps. So there's literally probably about 33 steps in there uh, while we're looking at this. So I'll put it to 255. Let me put escape threshold down to 1 again. And there's probably literally just 255 colors in there at that point. If we cut this in half, you'll see half that, and so forth and so on. I'll go to 64, and you're probably literally seeing 64 colors in here. So that is, but if we go up to like a higher value, you start to see a lot more of the detail. But then you start to realize that the shapes here, you're not seeing these grand columns and that sort of thing. Like you see everything squished down towards the lake. That's because there's sort of a gamma, a curve of how intense the colors start to fall off. So we can actually change this gamma to is between 0 and 1. So if we go down to 0.9, you start to see more detail. 0.8, 0.7, and 0.6, 0.5. You start to see more detail there. And this can be really useful. Let me set the iteration threshold up a bit here and set the depth to something a little bit higher, 1,000 or 10,000. Here's where you can really start to take advantage of this. So if this camera were at 1, you'd see almost nothing at 10,000, the depth of 10,000. So we'd actually have to start taking this down to say 0.5 or 0.4 or 0.3 or 0.2. But what you see when we set this depth up higher, you start to see a lot more detail, a lot more iterations, a lot more steps. With the depth, you actually see these colors having to repeat, like a sort of color cycle over and over again, which we didn't get before. So you might see some of these colors repeated over and over, although they get finer and finer as they get towards the lake. It's sort of like a black hole where everything just gets crushed in towards this this shape in the middle. So we can actually create a lot of detail by zooming in closer and closer to this thing, and also increasing this depth. There's a limit to how much you can do that, but it is there. So those are some of the new parameters. Um, I do want to. There's also a preview depth, so those can be the same. The preview depth is for working interactively. So if this were only one, as you interact with this, you wouldn't see anything. And then it updates when you're finished. But the preview depth is so the GPU doesn't get overburdened or whatever while doing these interactive things, and then it can, when you finish doing them, it can render the whole thing. But in most cases, you can keep this the same value and get a good result because GPUs these days are really fast, and it doesn't mind doing that much work anymore. Maybe 10 years ago, that might have been a problem, or 5 years ago even. GPUs have improved a lot over the last 5 years. But anyways, so I'm going to put this gamma back to 1 and show you the smooth shading now. As we zoom into this, you can see instead of getting those steps or those gradations or those posterized colors, the smooth shading will, in fact, smooth that out for us. And I think it works best at 255 to demonstrate that. But if we turn that off, you can see these steps, and if we turn that on, you can see the steps are now eliminated, and there's just a smooth gradation. So those are the new features in the Mandelbrot Explorer program. One other thing I didn't mention is that you can now load Julia sets directly from another filter we have, which is a Julia set Explorer, and you can deep dive into the Julia set. So I will go into that next, but there are actually an infinite number of Julia sets, so you can actually export them from the other filter and then bring them into here and explore them and deep dive and zoom in and animate and all that sort of thing. So that's one of the things you can do with that. Let me go to that. Should be here, right there. And it looks much like the other filter. We see the Mandelbrot in the center, but as we move around, you don't see the Mandelbrot anymore. You see the Julia set being rendered. Well, what's going on is the Julia set is actually a subset of the Mandelbrot, and it is sort of a cross section of the 2D Mandelbrot. If you were to look at the edge of this lake, this is what you would see on the edge, kind of. But if you zoom out into space, you don't see anything. And if you zoom into the lake, you just see this big blob in the middle. But if you go around the edge is where you really start to see these crazy details. And as I said before, there's an infinite number of Julias because there's an infinite number of steps around here, or at least practically infinite, or you know what I mean. And one other thing you can do here is, in addition to saving these out, of course, there's a plus button over here. You can save these out, and you can also reload them in both the Mandelbrot and in here. But one additional thing you can do here is, say we had an animation, and I'll just create a quick animation, 60 frames default, and I'll turn on this little key here, and it's just like drawing a path. You can create a little path along here. It's just like drawing a path with a drawing tool of some sort. And once we've created that path, all we do is click animate, and it will run through that path for us and animate that. So those are the new features in the Mandelbrot and Julia set tool in Howler 2023. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later.